Hey kids, another Malachi video on something that's very simple and yet somebody probably want to know. Got a report of a weird noise that was coming from the back end of, this is an Infinity i30, about a 2001 model, I'm not sure. Anyway, should be the same as a Maxima. Similar to the Ultimas and whatnot. Anyway, the report was noise from the back left rear hub, and we were trying to figure out what it was. It sounded actually to me almost like a bad shock, so I pulled the shock out. Shock doesn't appear to be all that bad. Certainly not bad enough where it's going to be making that kind of a sound. It sounded to me like two rabbits fighting in a drum, or two rabbits fighting in a barrel. So I thought, alright, well, let Malachi try and figure out what the problem might be. So I took the shock apart. Didn't really see much there. Bushing here is starting to go out. It's showing wear and age, but it's not really that bad. Here's where I found the problem. Now, this is an unscientific method of doing this. A proper method is using a dial indicator. I don't have a dial indicator happen to be with me, but I do happen to have vice grips and a screwdriver. Now the trick here is you get that screwdriver tip as close as you can to your rotor. This purpose of this video, by the way, is so that we can determine a warped rotor. Now your caliper bracket here that the bracket that the caliper mounts to is a fixed position in relation to the axle and everything else. So this will tell us one of two things, or give us information on one of two things. Either A, really bad hub bearing, which I feel nothing wrong with the bearing. Oh, you hear that little squeak. Or a warped rotor. Now these pads are relatively new. There was no report of any sort of pulsing or anything before this. So these pads were installed not that long ago. My first indication that there was an issue is when I first pulled them off. This is all kinds of discoloration and lots of little chips and chunks blown out of this rotor, or I mean this brake pad. Similar with this one. Let me see if you can see the minor fracture, lots of micro fractures and fissures and issues. So here's what I do. Here's a method of finding a warped rotor. Number one, put at least 2 lug nuts back on, screw them all the way down till your rotor is in a fixed position on the wheel bearing. Okay, now I feel no play in this wheel bearing. I feel no grinding, no roughness. I spun the wheel with my hand on the spring. That's also a technique you can use. Put your hand on the spring and spin the bearing. It'll transfer a lot of the vibration and rumble through the spring. Didn't feel any of that, so I'm concluding right now at this point that the wheel bearing is fine. But what you do is you take your screwdriver and you put it into the slide area. Now, not all vehicles will you be able to do this, but this method does work. I then used my trusty old vice grips, and seriously, buy the Irwin vice grips. These things are freaking like 90 years old, or at least close to 200, 250 years old, these old things, and they still work freaking great. Where you buy the freaking, I'm not real impressed with the Husky brands or any of those other Cobalt brands. You run your screwdriver as close as you can to the wheel, or to the rim, or sorry, the rotor. Boy, and now the way I did it was I clamped it down, got it pretty close, and then just tapped it with a hammer until it was right up there. Whoops. And of course I just screwed it all up. So I usually run it till just when it touches. And look at that. And we now have determined at this point that we have a warped rotor. Now what I did was I marked the area here and here with my greasy finger, and you can see right where it starts and where it ends. And that's the short, fast, and dirty way of, this is not a scientific method, but it does work in the field when you don't have the right fucking tools. Determining a warped rotor when you don't have the right shit. Like I said, a dial indicator is the right way to do it, but I'm gonna call this one bad and go get them a new brake rotor, put this thing together, and hopefully it'll be all good. So peace out, bitches.